Thank you for taking your seats. We had the coffee break just a bit longer than usual because we felt that there was a lot of opportunity for networking with amongst yourselves, of course, and with our exhibitors. It's the first morning. It's an opportunity to get to know each other. So I'd like to once again thank ACI for sponsoring the coffee break and networking activity. And as we get settled in, I'd like to also remind ourselves about the app, the ICAO app. Again, I mentioned because it has worked very well over the past 24 hours, yesterday and last year when we got started. And it's a great opportunity again to ask questions and keep in touch with the different activities of the symposium and with your fellow participants. So all of the information is contained in the first page of the program. Okay. Can you find Mark again because he disappeared? Okay. Yes. So we'll just wait for a few more seconds for everyone to come in. There we go. Thank you so much. Okay, we move on now to the first session of the morning. It is on risk awareness, and to lead us into the session is an old friend of ICAO, Mark Rodmell. I'd like to provide just a few notes on his biography, his extended career. Mark is currently Head of Aviation Security Policy and Regulation at the Department for Transport in the United Kingdom. He's also chair of the ICAO AVSEC panel's working group on threat and risk. Mark was first involved in aviation policy in 1992 when he was tasked with reviewing UK policy on aircraft noise. He was from 2003 to 2008 the UK head of international aviation negotiations for North America and Asia Pacific, with additional responsibility for facilitation policy. Subsequently, he was head of aviation security policy and international representation in the UK Department for Transport and was the UK representative on the ICAO Aviation Security Panel from 2008 to 2012. Mark was also the United Kingdom permanent representative to ICAO from 2012 to 2017 and chair of ICAO Council's Committee on Unlawful Interference from 2014 to 2015. So I guess, Mark, after ICAO, you're back in your old job, is that it? So welcome home twice then. Thank you, Mark. The floor is yours to you and your panel. Thank you so much. Let's try it again.
Excellent. Oh, I can hear myself through the earpiece now as well, so I'm officially here. I don't know what I did to it, but we're going to have to trust the technology in a number of ways during this morning's session, including the use of the app. Yes, we will be using the app, so please get ready for that. But before we do that, I'd just like to say it's good to be starting the first of these subject-specific panel sessions with the question of risk assessment. In devising a policy, I think everybody these days agrees that you should start with the risk that it is that you're trying to deal with. And I think it's clear also from the comments from our leaders plenary earlier that there's a broad consensus that a risk-based approach to security is the right one. And no risk, no need for security, we can all go home. But what do we actually mean by risk-based approaches and risk assessment? I think that's the more difficult question. There are several references to the necessity for risk assessment in Annex 17 of the Chicago Convention, our Bible of Standards. So it's a requirement. All states have to do it. And indeed, states may require industry actors to do it. But in spite of those 6 or 7 requirements relating to risk assessment, Annex 17 contains no actual definition of risk assessment. It's been a problem. Now, ICAO has in recent years taken a number of steps to improve risk assessment capability around the world. Probably the most significant one of those was the launching of the risk context statement, which was done at the first high-level conference on aviation security in 2012. And the risk context statement is now an ICAO publication. You can just get it on the ICAO website, and it really is something to be recommended to everybody. But that's quite a high-level document and quite a state-led approach. There's much more to the question of risk assessment than that. The ability of all actors, states, airports, carriers, manufacturers, to conduct their own risk assessment really is key to making effective strategic and day-to-day decisions about our approach to security. So, reflecting the fact that the question of risk assessment requires a diverse approach, we have a set of panelists from various walks of life. Our diverse approach, I'm afraid, does not really extend to a very good gender balance this morning. I'm sorry about that, but never mind. We've got some very good talent here anyway. We have regulators, we have the industry, we have those from innovative information and risk management services. So, starting from my left, we have Mr. Komlan Adonko, who is the Aviation Security Director of the National Civil Aviation of Togo. We have Matthew Vaughan, Aviation Security Director of the International Air Transport Association, IATA. We have Andrew Nicholson, Chief Executive Officer of Osprey Flight Solutions. David Aguilar, who is Principal at Global Security and Innovative Strategies. And finally, John Vello, who is Chief of Screening Oversight and International Operations at Transport Canada. Now, as I mentioned, there will be questions for you as our participants to answer through the app. You don't get away without doing some work yourselves in these things, I'm afraid. But what I'd like to do, just to set the scene on this, is go to the first question, which is for our panel members. So if, Kirsty, thank you for that. Our first question then is, why is risk assessment important and how has it affected the way you work? So, Komlan, perhaps I could start with you to give us a brief introduction to this question from your own point of view.
Merci.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. I represent the AVSEC and facilitation as director from the National Civil Aviation Administration of Togo. Yesterday we began the symposium with a discussion on behalf of the industry regarding countering acts of terrorism through innovation that are accessible and those that are not so much accessible in order to meet this challenge. Today, the panel of leaders spoke to the importance of battling acts of unlawful intervention, taking into account the various threats that today are caused by adversaries in air transport on a worldwide basis. Faced with these challenges, the governments must put in place means and measures that are adequate in order to effectively, as well as efficiently, capable of combating this threat. And what that means making strategic choices. Strategic choices in the sense that the resources are not endless, and therefore we have to make strategic choices, and therefore we need to have methodologies based on risk assessments. In ICAO, we have spoken about GASAP, which is the Global Aviation Security Plan. The leading objective of GASAP is risk assessment and awareness of risks. The last amendment to Annex 17, which is amendment number 16, which came into effect in November, is linked to new standards, new norms that are to help the states to introduce new standards. For instance, sharing information with operators and with other suppliers of services in order to improve risk assessment at that level. Faced with significant risks, for instance, the threat of IEDs. So the standard is now to use means of detection of explosives when we are screening passengers and their baggage. The standard also says that if this method is not applied consistently, then the method should be used at least in an unpredictable fashion. This morning, during the leaders' plenary, there was a reference made to differentiation during screening. In order to be able to differentiate, we must carry out a risk assessment of the passengers. All of which goes to say that the risk is a true challenge, and therefore risk assessment is essential, both internationally and at a national level in the states. For the states, we speak of competent authorities. Therefore, the risk assessment makes it possible to determine the level of risk that is linked to any operation, to make adjustments to the existing security measures to make them more effective, and also at the level of the competent authority. This risk assessment methodology is essential, as it allows, in practice, to plan our quality control measures during oversight of security. We know from the past that activities were planned on the basis of traffic volume, different types of operators at the airports, but today we are now adding a risk assessment methodology to the picture, and therefore we are moving towards choosing the challenges that pose the greatest risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Komlan. That's a very useful insight for the first one from one of our regulators. So, Matt, from the industry point of view, what's the particular take that you would have on this question?
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. So let me just come straight to the point. There have been enough high-impact, low-frequency, tragic events, in the last 17 years to just completely underscore why reactive risk assessment is needed. And what I mean by that is, when you talk to your C-level executives, when you talk to your ministers, there's got to be something in the past, there's got to be a precursor in the past that can help best predict what may take place today or at least tomorrow. And, again, tragically, I think the events of MH17 really brought that to the table, that risk assessment, and even more than that, integrated risk assessment, just completely underscored why taking this kind of approach will continue to be important for the industry for the next 10 to 20 years. In terms of how it's affected the way we work, evidently, in terms of the IATA program, we're quite strong with the ICAO working groups and being present and continuing to evolve the technical discussions, at least at the guidance material level. Great point, Mark, on the fact that Annex 17 doesn't have a description of what risk assessment is, but it actually has a standard that empowers states to carry out risk assessments and adjust settings accordingly. And therefore, on that basis, and again, to your point, the need to continue to do risk-based security, orientate measures, orientate the effort towards areas that are needed, is probably something you're going to hear in many different ways over the course of today and into the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Matthew. Moving on then, Andrew. You've been doing things to try to close some of our gaps in the ability to conduct risk assessments. So perhaps from your perspective, we can hear on this question.
Thank you, Mark. And it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm going to answer the second part, if I may, first, because it's an easy one. Because I wouldn't have a job if we didn't have risk assessment, because that's what we do. We use open source exploitation to provide risk assessment, data-led risk management support to the industry. So why is risk assessment important? And I think in some ways, and the words that Matthew used there about integrated risk assessment is I really think at the very core of why risk assessment is so important. Risk assessment is fundamental to every decision that every single one of us makes on a daily basis. Every time we make a decision, we balance the risk and the reward. And understanding that risk is vital to be able to make the right decision, and the decision that best supports our people, best supports ourselves, and best supports our organizations. But integrating risk assessment, therefore, as a real core aspect of decision making within any organization, within any industry, is the way to making sure that risk assessment, that risk management process is as effective and efficient as possible. And if you can do that, and if you're able to do that, then risk management, proper risk management, can really bring great benefits to any organization and any industry. Of course, the primary benefit being that people are safer, that the industry is more secure. But of course, the aviation industry is a commercial industry, and we have to recognize that if risk management processes don't support that commercial imperative, then it's never going to have the same impact that otherwise it could. So I think making sure that risk management is really integrated with core processes, core decision-making processes, and making sure that risk assessment process is effective by using all the tools and the sources available to an organization is the way to enhance profitability, to enhance, to enable business, to allow you to operate in areas that otherwise wouldn't be able to operate, and to help with compliance issues, and to support the relationship that member states will have with their operators as well. And that is why I think risk assessment is so critical in the industry. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Andrew. Then turning on to David, now also in the risk management area, but with a slightly sort of different angle on this, I guess. From your point of view, what's the importance here?
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here this morning. And my point of view is going to be from that of an operator and an end user. I think it's important for me to contextualize my response to this question for the following reason. Because I was an operator, I was an end user in the following positions. I was the National Chief of the United States Border Patrol for a little over 6 years during a time period in our country when border security was at its highest peak of interest. We had a tremendous amount of illegal flow into our country, and I happened to be the Chief of the United States Border Patrol at that time. Risk and risk assessment was absolutely critical at that time. I went from that position to Deputy Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which oversees 327 airports. Over 100 of those are international airports, with over 100 million passengers a year coming internationally into the United States. Risk and risk assessment, managing that risk was absolutely vital, absolutely critical to our operations day in and day out. And then thirdly, I retired after a 35-year career in government service as the acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection for a period of almost 2 years. Now, the reason I mentioned all three of these, because risk and risk assessment came into play in each one of those positions. On the Deputy Commissioner and Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, it was critically important for us to understand what it was that we were facing, what it was that it would take to mitigate, to reduce risk. And one thing we understood, and I think this goes for everybody in the audience today, we cannot eliminate risk 100%. That just cannot be done. But we can mitigate, we can reduce, we can approach the issue of risk in an intelligent fashion. Now, the world that I came from, basically you took a look at risk in the three following categories: preventable risk, strategic risk, and external risks. Took a look at each one of those and basically made a decision on budgets, on operations, on capabilities, on requirements that basically painted a picture of what the operational environment was. And that was one of the most useful tools that we had to basically fight the adversary, fight the bad actor. Now, there were a couple of points of frustration on a daily basis, and those were the following. One is the speed of the bad actor, the adversary, the enemy, to adjust, to make a course correction to anything that we did. Tremendous amount of speed for them to do that. And then one of the frustrating things, which was a very positive thing but very frustrating to us that were the operators, was that speed to market of technologies, of capabilities that existed being generated by the industry, speed to market was there. What lacked was speed of those products to the operator. And that is something that we still have to continue to work on. Because unfortunately, at times we found ourselves applying technologies that had taken 3 to 4 years to get certified in order for the operators to use. That's unacceptable. Because by that time, guess what? We all know this. The adversary and the enemy was already changing direction. So that takes me to where we are today. I am retired about a little over 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and now I usually start my conversations with the following, saying that I wish I knew then, when I was in those seats, what I know now about what industry can do, what we need to do in order to accelerate the operators' capabilities at these critically important junctures of airports and ports of entry. So today, part of what we do is we take a look at my little firm, we take a look at compliance, we take a look at technology viability, we take a look at supporting industry on technology certification, and we take a look in making sure that we move forward to integrate all of those capabilities. So the answer to the question is critically important. Risk management, risk assessment should drive operations, should drive the requirements, identify the capabilities that are needed, and done so in a perpetual means, because the bad operator, the bad actor, is consistently moving.
Thanks very much for that, David. Very clear exposition, I think, of the some of the answers that we have here. So, John, Canada was one of the sort of the early movers in terms of the international work on risk assessment within ICAO. From your point of view, as a regulator, how does this question affect you?
Well, oui, bonjour, mon nom est John Velo.
Hello, my name is John Vello.
Question to answer for me, being the last on the panel to answer this question, I could just say I echo all of your arguments on why risk assessment is important, but I'll take it a step further. Why is risk assessment important? Yesterday, I attended a very, very well-prepared security culture workshop that was put on by the ICAO Working Group on Training that was delivered by the UK, our good allies. And the first thing I came out of that meeting or that workshop was that we need to educate staff on what exactly is expected from them. Why is it that what they're doing is that critical? So what's important? And the way I see risk assessment is a process that's going to give you the answer to that question. So why are we doing what we're actually doing today? So all of you alluded that it's an international obligation. There are several standards in Annex 17 that makes reference to risk assessment, correct? So we have to do it because it's an obligation, but it has to mean something. When I started at Transport Canada 19 years ago, we were already, dropping the word risk assessment and risk management once in a while. But back in the days, 19 years ago, when you say, oh, we're just going to risk manage it, that means we're not going to do anything about it. So over the years, we've actually brought some objectivity into the process. And again, there's been a lot of work being done among states, working through ICAO. ICAO has an excellent workshop on risk assessment. Canada has just realigned its methodology to align with ICAO's methodology. And what that methodology allows you to do is bring some objectivity in the process, but being proactive. It's an opportunity to self-assess yourself, self-assess your regime, and seeing what's working and what's missing. So we're always saying that, there's several acts, but the majority of our standards, our regulatory requirements, were all implemented after those acts. So a very reactive program. So the purpose of a security assessment, in my mind, and why it's important, it gives you that process to actually be proactive. Think ahead of the bad guys. So with that, in terms of how has it changed my job, well, that's an easy question. I think all of you alluded to. We look at risk three different levels. From a strategic point of view, it basically gives us an opportunity to set our priorities, our program priorities. What policy do we need to change? What regulations do we need to amend? So what's our agenda moving forward to make sure that our system is actually addressing today's threats? From an operational perspective, we look at it at the local level, at the airport levels, at the operator levels. What we're asking them to do, is that sufficient? Or do we need to greater align with some of the real evolving threats? And then using the same methodology from a tactical perspective, it allows us greater flexibility to look at non-compliance. So if somebody's having a hard time complying with a standard requirement, what's the risk behind that non-compliance at the moment of the non-compliance? So I think we've came a really, really long way in defining what risk is. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but I can't emphasize, and I'm sure that all of you today understand why risk is such an important component. Thanks.
Thanks for that, John. So it's important. We've established it's fundamental. Indeed, it's the first thing that we should be thinking about. But one of the questions that we always encounter in looking at risk assessment is how do we make sure we have the tools for the job? Now, in keeping with the point that John has just made about the importance of security culture and the idea that security and indeed risk assessment is for everybody and not just the people on this panel, for all of you, what we are about to do is now open up the first of our poll questions, and I am looking nervously in Kirsty's direction to hope that this works. And so the question that I hope will appear on the screen now is, what is the most valuable source of information for risk assessment? And as you see, we are crowdsourcing this question. You can now go onto the app and you can enter free text in order to answer this question. It's not a multiple choice, I'm afraid. We operate according to the essay principle rather than multiple choice here. But I think actually the answer to the question that we're getting from all of you on this should probably tell us something quite important about what we need to do on this. So while you're firing up the app again or trying to remember what your password was and things like that so that you can answer it, we'll move on to another question for the whole of the panel, which is the second question. The screen source changes again. And here we go, and it's there. It all works, brilliant. So what's the most important thing someone should think about in embarking on risk assessment? Andrew, can I start with you on this one? Because that's, I think, something which is very, very relevant to the work that you do.
Thanks, Mark. And absolutely, the fundamental requirement of a risk assessment is to understand what those threats are. Mark, you said it in your introduction. I think you need to deal with the risk that you have to deal with, and you need to understand what that risk is, and the fundamental requirements. That is understanding the threat that leads onto that risk. So the most important thing anyone can do in conducting a risk assessment is to gather as much information as possible from as many sources as possible to understand what that threat might look like, and therefore be able to assess the risk associated with that threat. Now, the importance of gathering large amounts of information, I think, can't be understated. The reason for this is to try and gather an objective view of what that threat and what that risk is. Limited source of information and limited information leads to inherent biases and inherent gaps in understanding of the totality of that threat. And therefore, spreading the net as wide as possible to gather that information, bring it in, and being able to assess and understand that is the most important part of conducting a risk assessment.
Okay, thanks for that. And moving then immediately to my left, again, Matthew, from the industry point of view, you're very much at the sharp end of this kind of question. So, from your point of view, how do you start? What's the first thing to think about?
So the easy response is again to Andrew's point around information sharing, get the collection right. But I'm going to go a different angle. And it's know your audience of who is actually going to receive the risk assessment. Understand the perceptions around why you're actually doing the risk assessment and what it's for. And actually, in preparing for this panel, we were talking about the differences between qualitative and quantitative risk assessment. So do you use numbers to convey risk, or do you use words, and how do you evoke the different perceptions? And if I can, Mark, one of the examples I used was I heard a guy say to me many years ago that 1 out of 3 marriages fail, and the entire dinner table was shocked and just couldn't believe that he was raising this subject. But then he quickly said, well, that means that 2 out of 3 survive, and amazingly turned it into a positive story. So the point is know who your audience is, understand their perceptions. And as best you can, get the subjectivity under control within the risk assessment process.
Okay, that's a really valuable point on what are we actually trying to do with risk assessment. Is there really to govern the approach that we take on this? That probably actually prompts me to go to David, as you described yourself as the end user on this. So would you agree with that analysis of the important thing from the end user point of view?
I would, definitely. All of those things are critically important, but I would add the following thing, that as an operator, an end user, and somebody who was heavily involved in risk assessment and trying to constantly improve it, is the following. It's not easy. It is not easy. If we're finding that risk assessment is something that is working well, then we're doing something wrong. And the reasons for that is risk assessment, at the basis of risk assessment, is the fullest view that you can get of information, of data, in order to determine, first and foremost, the known threats. What are the known risks? And that's the easiest one. Those are usually in black and white. We have watch lists, we have lookouts, we have international warrants and things of this nature. Those are the easy ones. The ones that worry the operators, that should worry all of us, are the unknown threats. What are the unknown threats? What is the easiest way to identify the unknown threats? Is ingesting as much information as we can, not only domestically, but certainly internationally, in order to ensure that we get the fullest, most vibrant, richest means to make that risk assessment. Now, the reason I say it's not easy, one of the toughest things to do is break through cultural and legacy ways of thinking. That was one of the hardest things, and continues to be one of the hardest things to overcome, is how do we share information that, frankly, in the world we came from, in the United States before 9/11, It was a need-to-know basis. I've seen this put up here several times. We live in a world where we have a need to know, a need to share in order to ensure that our traveling populations are at their safest so that we can do those full risk assessments. It's not easy. It can be done. And one of the main things that I think we need now currently throughout the world is good, strong leaders and leadership that are going to continue driving us to that unified, collaborative, holistic risk assessment capability that exists. We're not there yet, but we should continue driving to that at every opportunity. And I see this ICAO AVSEC meeting as a critical part of that.
Thanks for that, David. I'll now turn to our two state regulators here. We'll start off with John this time. I guess here we're talking about risk assessment as a matter of driving public policy, as well as a question of what the end user does with it in a practical way. So, from the point of view of your own authority, what's the important starting point in conducting this kind of assessment?
I think a lesson that we can share here today is that in terms of what is the most important consideration when you're embarking in risk assessment, it has to be that it's a very, very powerful process. So when I started doing risk assessments, often I was asked to stop because the risk assessment was going in a direction that the organization was not necessarily ready to pursue. And what I mean here is that when you're actually running through a risk assessment process and you're doing it properly, and again, I made reference to the ICAO methodology. That's a very structured approach. When you're doing your risk assessment, you're not limited by the bounds of your current framework. So the threat landscape changes, which means that you may realize that what you have in place is not necessarily adequate for today's threat. So when you're doing a risk assessment, you may identify consequences that your organization is not necessarily able to cope with those consequences if it does not implement additional controls or additional measures. So it's a very, very powerful tool. And it's a powerful tool that, like our colleague said here, you need to use that tool, but also to share information. And that information, is shared to feed into your risk assessment. But once your assessment is done, you actually have to share the information to those that actually have the authority to make decisions. From a state level, from an operator level, once you've identified a risk, you can no longer just document that risk and not do anything about it. When I say powerful tool, you actually have now a document process that outlines what are your risks. And if there are some considerable risks in there, there's a whole liability issue that starts kicking in. So again, for me, it's a very powerful tool. It's one of the most wonderful tools, but that's something that you need to consider, is that the results may actually require you to do something more than what you're actually doing today.
Thanks for that, John. And Komlan, you're also looking at this from a state perspective, but also you've done plenty of work in the international field on questions of security. So from your point of view, how would you address this question on the most important thing to start with in conducting risk assessment?
Okay, merci.
Thank you. Indeed, in order to conduct a risk assessment, as it was said, you have to start by identifying the various threats. But beyond that, if we can sum up risk assessment in 3 stages, you have to identify each of the stages: the assessment of the risk at the level of vulnerabilities or of the consequences. You have to identify who all the stakeholders are. Who are the sources of information in each place or at each stage? And after that, who is the information given to? So these are the essential aspects for the assessment of the risk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Komlan. And you very helpfully then brought us back round to the question of sources of information here. So at this point, I ask us to see how well are our audience doing then on the question that we asked earlier, and are there any themes emerging here? So we have a word cloud, and the words, the larger the word, the more often it featured in the answers that were given, and we're still seeing things move around. Intelligence is large and in the center. And information, there's some overlaps on there. We see threats, we see vulnerabilities, we see references to frontline workers, oversight, control, data. Again, I'm going to, I think, pass this one in the first place on to Andrew for comment, as somebody who has a lot of time to think about questions on sources of risk assessment. Andrew, is there anything missing there, or is there anything surprising about the priorities and the most important things that have come out here?
I don't think there's anything particularly surprising, and I think that most of the areas trying to scan through it quickly there are covered. And I did see both social media and open source highlighted in there, which I think is a very important part of it. And obviously social media becoming part of that open source requirement. And I think what this does is show that there are three key sources of information, and all three of them are vitally important to being able to conduct a risk assessment. Those three being government, member states, industry reporting itself, internal reporting, and open source. And without all three of those, and I think all those words in the word cloud can be lumped into one of those three buckets. All of those, without all of those three, it's very difficult to get a really balanced picture of the threat and the risk.
Okay, intelligence appears in very large letters there indeed, and this can mean a number of things. Of course, it can mean intelligence in the sense that states gather through services, but it can simply mean questions of forward thinking and knowledge. I'm going to turn back to another of our state actors in that case, given the sort of state intelligence component on that. So, John, on that point, to what extent would you regard intelligence in the traditional sense of things that states gather as being important, but to what extent are there other sources that need to be built in? Is it a surprise that we've got intelligence so much front and center in this response?
Actually, it's not a surprise, and intelligence is probably the only word that I can read right now. If there's something that's missing, it's me wearing glasses to actually look at that screen properly. But intelligence, when we talk about sharing information, we automatically convert information into intelligence. And I think intelligence sharing really depends on the government's infrastructure to actually share that intelligence. But I always have a conversation with my colleague, and yesterday someone at the panel yesterday made reference to sharing actionable intelligence. And that made me think, and we realize often we do have intelligence that we could share with industry, but because of all sorts of rules, policies, and sensitivities, we have that hesitation. But if we were to take out those important details, that would still provide sufficient information to stakeholders, to operators, to take that information and actually feed it into their risk assessment process. So I think we have to evolve in that area, is not necessarily deduct that anytime we talk about intelligence, it cannot be shared. We just have to use that intelligence smart. In terms of bringing it back to source of information, intelligence is not the only source of information that's actually important for your risk assessment. Those of you who are familiar with the methodology proposed by ICAO, we're looking at threats, consequences, and vulnerabilities. Now, each one of these components require very specific source of information. If I look at threat, open sources, there's a whole bunch of open sources on the screen. I think I see social media there, I see agencies. There's tons of open sources that could be used. In terms of vulnerability assessments, ICAO has a USAP program. It provides some indicators of compliance of vulnerabilities. There's a state's quality control. So all those are sources of information that are important. In terms of your consequence assessments, this is where I think we could do a better job at sharing information. So whenever there is an act, there should be some sort of hot wash and saying, you know what, here's the real consequences in terms of a liability perspective, but also in terms of a cost perspective. So if you look at what are the direct costs, what are the indirect costs, I think we could actually do a better job at sharing that source of information. So for me, there's not one source of information that's more important. They're all important. And that would make an effective security risk assessment.
We see there as well that frontline workers and staff are looming quite large there, which I think is consistent with what we heard yesterday, and which you referred to, John, in relation to the security culture workshop that occurred. Then intelligence agencies actually feature slightly smaller on the screen there, which again is an interesting thing. I think it shows that the debate is moving on. I think this is a fantastic tool, actually. We can save this information, presumably, Kirsty, so that can be available for everybody. That's great. In that case, well, since you've all done so well on this question, what I think we'll do is actually we'll go straight to the second of the poll questions that we've got here.
Mark, may I?
Yes, certainly.
Very quickly on that one, because that's very interesting on that intelligence. Intelligence is absolutely key. Absolutely key. The one thing that I think I would touch base on that is who defines intelligence. And the reason I say that is the following. As a young agent, many years ago, one of the first things that I was taught working in the field, hands-on, was that the most important thing we could do was gather what was then known as pocket trash. And this basically was stuff that was inside the pockets of individuals that we detained, that we arrested, or that we encountered. Of course, all within the legal bounds of search and frisk and constitutional rights and things of this nature. But I remember as a young agent, especially as a young agent that didn't have a lot of experience, coming up with all of these pieces of trash that basically came out of the pockets of these individuals that meant little to nothing for me. But many, many times, one little piece of pocket trash was a vital a brush stroke, if you will, in a very critical picture. Now, fast forward to where we are today. How do we access pocket trash? A lot of those are on here. And the reason I go to this is social media, open source, and all of these things. We go to where we are. A lot of people talk about artificial intelligence. We're not at artificial intelligence yet. We're basically at what I believe is known as the Internet artificial intelligence. We're basically labeled property, data sets are being taken and worked. We also have basically business AI intelligence, which is the ability to take proprietary data sets and integrate those. But that's where we're at now. The problem there is, and the challenge is on the proprietary data sets, is it's volunteer. It's what we are willing to share with each other. So in those two data sets are critical pieces of pocket trash. And I say that, again, just pushing for the sharing of information, the sharing of data. One of the questions that was asked earlier is, what is the greatest threat that we face? I truly believe that the greatest threat that we face is not sharing information to the degree that we need to, given the world in which we live today.
Thanks for that, David. That's a really powerful point. Matthew and Komlan, in the interest of time, I think what I'll do is if you want to comment on what we've got here, if you can build that into answers to the next question, which will come up, because we do need to, I'm aware that we are the only thing between our audience and its lunch, and so we do need to keep to the timescale as much as possible. So, many of you have already got this, but I'll just repeat it. We're asking here, what are the most important gaps in our knowledge? And we have some answers there already. So while we complete that, and you can continue to fill in your answers to that, Kirsty, can we move to the third of the panel questions in that case, which is The one I think which is to do with a acceptable level of risk. So this brings us back again to our question of what we think the risk assessment is for and what we should do with it. So I'll start off with Matthew and then Komlan on this side on this question, because it's quite a sensitive one. Risk appetites for security and risk appetites for safety are not necessarily the same. You can't necessarily count these things in deaths or injuries or even in money. So how should this affect our question from your point of view, Matthew?
Thanks, Mark. So, great distinction between safety and security. One is inherently more emotional, and the other one is, dare I say, there's a higher degree of acceptability around safety occurrences and the need to learn from what has taken place within those safety occurrences. And if I can take that a bit further, 2017 was the safest year on record in terms of civil aviation. So having said that, our safety colleagues continue to push the numbers and create the reliability in the industry that we have today. So when trying to answer what is an acceptable level of risk, it's naturally a balance between opportunity and risk. And I think Andrew said it quite early in the comments around the commercial imperative that specifically within civil aviation, airlines operate to make money, and therefore they need to do that in the most safest and optimized way. And again, I make this point: the issues around air corridor safety and air corridor security speak directly towards how our industry defines what's acceptable and what isn't.
Thanks for that. Komlan, I said I would go to you next. So what do we mean by an acceptable level of risk? Are there things that we should just say we're prepared to live with, or how do we draw the line on this from your point of view?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Acceptable risk. It's a difficult question. If a state or an entity, an operator, conducts a risk assessment, at some point they need to determine the level of consequences that they're ready to accept. And so that means the acceptable risk. And so security risk and safety risk, in terms of consequences, I don't really see much of a difference. But in terms of the assessment, the security risks are more difficult to assess because one of the parameters is the adversary as a factor. Whereas in safety, the risk is based on various factors, namely the frequency and the seriousness. And so here you have the various factors, but in security you have the aggressor. So that's one way you can distinguish them. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Komlan. I'll hop across straight to David actually now, because I think, David, you were the one who explicitly said in answer to the earlier question that we cannot eliminate 100% of risks. So to look at it another way, because we had Matthew turning around the question of 1 in 3 marriages don't survive to 2 in 3 do, what risks can we accept in that case? And, is there a question of public appetites for this that we should consider in saying, where does a risk assessment end? At what point we say we've come off the end of what we can sensibly deal with?
So I think the first thing is we accept that we live with risk on a daily basis. This morning, walking over here, any one of us could have been hit by a car just walking over here. We could fall off this stand. So risk is inherent in our life. But I think the degree that we work towards is the following, that we take a look at the low probability, low impact risk that we live with and determine what that risk level is that's acceptable to us. And then we take a look at the high probability but low impact risk that we live with and make that determination as to what is acceptable there. Not easy, but as an example, the world that I came from, agricultural products coming into the United States were high probability and in some cases low impact. But there were some nasty little bugs that if they came into our country, they would destroy our economic potential in agriculture. So on those areas, we focused very, very high. On some of the other ones, it's not that we didn't care, we just focused our efforts on that high impact. Now, having said that, security risks and safety risks, neither one of these is easy to address. But of the two, the safety risks, I think, are easier. And the reason for that is because most of the time we're talking about, well, let me take an example that I actually experienced. We used to fly literally on a daily basis on Black Hawk helicopters. And those Black Hawk helicopters were very safe. And the reason for that is because literally every piece of machinery in that helicopter was censored. So that if something started going wrong, we would get a warning. We would get a red flag, time to basically land. That's easy to do because you're not putting a sensor on a human being. How do you do that when your adversary is a thinking, strategic, and patient adversary that is very capable of making a course correction when we take actions to mitigate the risk that he or she is planning? That to me is the most difficult one, but it can be addressed. It can be mitigated, it can be reduced by, again, the availability of information, the willingness to share, and the ability to act on it. Let me give you a quick example. I was at a conference about three weeks ago where a fellow speaker was from TSA, and they do an outstanding job. And what was put forth was right now one of the greatest challenges that are being had is being able to identify when laptops are being brought up to the checkpoints to make a determination that the battery portion of the laptops is not an explosive. That's critically important. But I would take it back even further than that. I would say that TSA inspector, the agency, needs to know more about the individual that owns that laptop, that carried it to the airport, that is looking to check it in, so that we take a much more aggressive and assertive capability to stop that event from happening. We will always need technology. We will always need technology in order to evade or to take care of those things that are going to get through. But we need to focus more on the predecessor to that to that explosive device getting to our airports.
Thanks very much for that, David. John, next. Canada is famously an open society, and there are kind of public concern issues with acceptable level of risk, but there are also public concern issues about the things that we're prepared to do and the things that we're prepared to do to people in order to mitigate risk. From your point of view as a regulator, how do you see security and safety risks interacting here in terms of what's acceptable and in terms of the results of our assessments?
Well, just to echo my colleagues here, I think there are two different elements to consider. I think safety risks are equally important as security risks if they're put into context. So there's not one that's more important than the other. In terms of some of the challenges we do have is, I think it's not only Canada, but we do have our state's laws. And in Canada, we have the Charter of Rights. So of course, sometimes we'd like to have state-of-the-art mitigations or control, but there's things that we just can't do. The public is just not willing to accept. However, in terms of accepting the level of risk, here assuming that you've gone through the risk assessment process and that you've actually looked at your mitigations, the effectiveness of your mitigations, you were able to reduce the probability and you were actually able to reduce the consequences, and then you're looking at your residual risk and you're like, okay, is it acceptable or not? It comes down to really tolerance. And the challenge we face on a daily basis is who actually defines that risk tolerance? What's the line in the sand? The line in the sand in terms of pursuing an opportunity. So we have carriers that want to fly to different areas. We want operations to grow. All these comes with different risks. So the state has their own risk assessments. The operator has their own risk assessments. But who sets the risk tolerance? And that's a question that we ask ourselves every day.
Thanks very much for that, John. And Andrew, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'm going to be maybe slightly cowardly and say that I think this is pretty much an impossible question to answer in a generic term, in a generic format like this, because it'll be completely different for every single person that looks at the risk. And that's driven by this being consisting of so many, or being comprised of so many factors. Each one of those is interpreted in a different way by individual people. And I think Matthew brought it up earlier. One of the real issues here between qualitative and quantitative risk assessments, and the problems with qualitative risk assessments, even though they're the expectation of many people, is that what I think is high risk, everyone else in this room thinks is slightly different, and everyone else in this room has different ideas about what that means for their operations, their day-to-day life, and all the rest of it. So the joys of language mean that every single phrase and qualitative and risk assessments in general are full of phrases is defined and understood differently by everybody who reads them. So this really is down to, and I think as you said, John, about who decides the risk tolerance. And actually the problem is you don't often know whether your risk tolerance was right until after the event and something either has happened or hasn't. And that's the sort of real challenge. So it's an exceedingly difficult question.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll now go on to the results of our second audience poll in relation to the most important gaps in our knowledge. I have got the results listed here. There must be, getting on for 100 answers here. And so we see expectations, we see complacency, we see insider threats as large their data, presumably the lack of it, uncertainties over cyber, which where our levels of understanding and analysis are developing here. Assumptions and bias, of course, feature as quite important ones here. I'll just throw this open to actually anybody in the group who wants to comment on this. Any thoughts on this? Anything unexpected or anything that we should add on this? If nobody's going to volunteer, Matthew's volunteered. He's safe.
So I'm going to make a plug for our cyber panel late yesterday afternoon. Look, I think the fact that cyber's on there twice and to a largely traditional physical security audience, I think that's really telling, and certainly something that ICAO and states and industry will definitely examine going forward.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And David?
I guess I would add that the gaps that exist, we have full control over. And by that I mean the following, that right now, I believe that in aviation security, as far as our knowledge and risk assessment capability goes, we have systems that are very good at connecting to other systems, and we have other systems within the system of systems that are not connecting or are connecting in a very elementary means. And that creates tremendous amount of gaps. So it's that holistic approach that we need to ensure that we have all the information needed to get that holistic risk assessment capability. And it may be on there, but I don't see it. It just needs to be that holistic information flow.
That's a really important point. John?
Really quickly, there's one little word there that says methodology, and I think we can all link these answers to that methodology. I think one of the most important gaps is the actual methodology itself. It's the lack of understanding. There's a lot of misperception on what risk is. We sometimes get intelligence, we get threat information, and we want to make decisions based on that threat information. Well, I have news. Threat is one component of the risk assessment. But if the consequences are not assessed, if the vulnerabilities are not assessed, you're not actually getting an accurate picture of what the risk actually is. So I think that we have to learn how to use the methodology. We need to learn how to understand the methodology to properly determine what risk to avoid some of the misperceptions that we see today.
Thanks very much for that, John. With apologies to the remaining panel members, I see that Denis is standing over there with that particular smile of his, which means that we are running out of time. And so, but what I would like to do is, there was going to be a fourth question for the panel, for which we didn't have time for. So, Kirsty, is it possible to get that one up on the screen? Because our conversations don't simply stop here. And so the question for all of us, which I think we can perhaps have conversations during the lunch break about, are there risks that we're just failing to consider and address? If so, what are they? This is not just about the gaps in the knowledge. Are there just things that we're failing to do, that we don't have sight of, if you like, our kind of unknown unknowns at the moment, where we ought to be doing a little bit better? So thanks to all of our participants for that. I think that's got us off to a great start in the thematic parts of the panels for this event. I will just hand over now back to Denis, as I think there is an announcement and another Sky Talk.
Well, before the announcement, a hand of applause for our panel this morning. Very, very ably led by Mark. Mark, thank you again. And it's nice to see you again at ICAO. Before we break, actually, you weren't the last thing between us and the lunch, and I'll explain in a few moments. But before, a few housekeeping items. The first one, the Aviation and Facilitation Information booth just around the corner here in front of the elevators will be focusing on East and South Africa region at the noon break. But I'd like to mention also that if you are from another region, you can still drop into the booth and chat with our colleagues and pick up the information, general information about aviation and facilitation. The lunch is provided on 2 food islands. There's one here, of course, as we exit the hall. And there's another one, again, at the elevators just around the corner and just in front of the Aviation and Facilitation Information booth. How convenient that is. Lunch is sponsored today by the General Civil Aviation Authority of the United Arab Emirates. Now, at this point, I'll mention that this evening's presentation, or this evening's reception, I should say, is sponsored by NUTEC. Now, for practical reasons, we've shifted the 2 presentations, so we will have the presentation by the UAE later on during the day, and at this point, we will have the presentation from NUTEC, and it will be given by B. Wenyuan. He is the senior scientist with NUTEC, and I don't see him in front of the room. Is he in the room somewhere? B, are you in the room?
Sorry, Denis. I so apologize because I just arrived here from the airport, and so many people are crowded and watching me about the suitcase. I don't know why, and I don't have time to get my clothes changes. So could you do me a favor? And I need about 5 minutes, and could you tell some more jokes, and I can get prepared. Is that okay?
No. I think it's quite all right to be dressed like that, but I do have a question. There is a suitcase following you here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's my suitcase. And yeah, that's why I said need to change.
This is just a security check, of course. Yes, that is your suitcase.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Good. Okay.
So,
So I hand it over to you if you want to make your presentation now in the dress that you have wearing at the moment.
really? I can
oh, yes,
do the
that's
presentation
okay.
like this?
Yeah, that's okay. That's
Oh, really? Okay,
That's
thank
okay.
you.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
thank you so much. Because I really don't like to wear dress. I like the suit, and in fact there is no suit in that suitcase. So okay. So but I still need 1 minute to get prepared because it's still a little and not under control. So why don't we just watch a video of us the first, and then I will give the presentation. Okay? Can we play the video?
I think we're
Thank you.
setting up right now.
The video should have sound.
If you question, you doubt. If you doubt, you search. If you search, you find. If you find, you learn. If you learn, you predict. If you predict, you grow. If you grow, you understand. If you understand, you see. And if you want to see more, we help. By thinking outside the box and also inside.
So my department made this video with 0 budget. 1 boy and 3 girls did the designing, script writing, reading, music and the sound fitting, acting, shooting, post-editing. Finish all the work in about 2 days. It's pretty good, right? And I'm very impressed by the saying, think outside the box and also inside. And this is a very insightful sentence. It's from a very famous, talented, creative, and interesting scientist in our industry. And he has been working in nuke tech for his whole career life. And his name is Dr. B. Wenyuan. Yes, it's me. And because I only have 15 minutes, right? Okay, so I don't want to waste your time because I heard our good friend, the United Arab Emirates, prepared a very nice lunch outside. So, Denis, could you help me do me a favor and could you take my time, 15 minutes? And if I'm going to run out of the time, you can just remind me, okay? Okay, thank you. And have you opened your microphone? I cannot hear you. Okay, thank you. So here we go. Why do I like this sentence so much? Because for all the great companies, that means solid technologies and unlimited innovation. They never stop thinking outside the box to explore the new field, to meet potential requirements in different ways. Then they come back to their own field inside the box. They use their solid technologies and resources to give the best solution. Head in the cloud, feet on the ground. Now, this spirit is also inspiring us to try our best to make the world safer. First, we also think outside the box. Open our mind to think what problems we are facing today. How to identify the year of a bottle of Lafayette. How to control drug smuggling. How to guarantee the safety of a recycled rocket. How to protect your personal information. How to select healthy food. How to avoid terrorism attack. To solve all these serious problems, there is a simple unified solution. Check once more with special technologies. We call this industry inspection. Actually, inspection is just like infrastructure and foundation of society, just like air, water, electricity, and internet. There are so many companies like NewTek have been working on the inspection area for decades, and we have made so many products and services. And we really trying to provide the best inspection to make the world a safer place. Or are we already the best? What do you think? Anyone who thinks current security inspection is good enough and is already the best, please raise your hand. Don't be ashamed. Anyone? No one? So that is the real awkward situation of security inspection we are facing. Ironically, we can still use the best to describe it. B representing the bothering, and E representing expensive, S representing slow, and T means tiring. So let's see what we really feel about security inspection. As a passenger, have you ever had this kind of experience, waiting in a long line, getting crazy but have no choices? You feel you're so lonely, you're so helpless because you're wasting your life. Or if you're an inspection staff, that will be much better. You will never feel alone. You always have at least 6 or 8 colleagues in your small team working together, and you will find your life is so real because you're always very busy without thinking any different. So this is the truth of security inspection. Paying lots of money, time, labor to exchange trust. NewTek is a very famous inspection company from a very historical country, China. It was also a Chinese man who firstly started using security inspection. He is our first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. He did lots of great well-known achievements. His place in Chinese history is more like the great Alexander and the great Caesar in Western world. Qin Shi Huang defeated 6 countries in only 10 years. He established the first united empire, Qin dynasty. He standardized the language, legal, maritime, financial systems. By the way, he built something famous called Great Wall. Such a great and powerful man, right? But you know that for his whole career, he has met so many times almost get killed. How could it happen? Because at the beginning of his career, he didn't pay enough attention for security inspection. Because of more and more assassination, Qin Shi Huang required that the security inspection should let him see everything and see every single threat, especially see something invisible. Of course, a lot of people think it was mad. It's impossible. So our Qin Shi Huang add another requirement, do impossible. And this requirement has become the dream of security industry. And Qin Shi Huang was really a genius. Without enough technologies, he still made some very creative inventions by making use of his own power to guarantee his own security, and we are still using these inventions today. The first, distance. So keep people far from him. And the second, bow and knees, just like that. That will make the illegal weapons very hard to hide. And the third is body search. Everyone get close to him need to be manually searched. And the fourth, deterrence. He always had the best and the most loyalty soldiers with weapons around him as bodyguards. Qin Shi Huang is the first man in inspection industry who can think outside the box and also inside. Well, 2,000 years passed. Today, his dream is realized by modern technology. NukeTech currently offers more than 1,000 products helping people to keep their security. All the machines can detect objects as big as human bodies, vehicles, containers, trains, airplanes, rockets, and also as small as bags, bottle of liquids, lighters, matches, even explosive dust in the air. And if you want to know the detail, we have many of these products outside. We have a booth outside. And these machines can produce excellent images, just like this. Okay. I just showed you 5 seconds of these images. So who can tell me how many threats, how many dangerous objects are inside? Anyone? Just a guess. A number. 2. Not even close. Okay. So nobody can tell what is inside in a short time, even though the images are really good, because people have limits. Just like what we showed in the previous video, we have today's achievement because we can make use of external tools, strengths, and wisdom. Now, the external wisdom to improve security inspection is AI. Our colleagues have already mentioned artificial intelligence. And to make the better use of AI, we need to know a basic knowledge. AI has 3 major components: algorithm, computing capacity, and data. Since AlphaGo, the deep learning and the similar algorithm becomes popular to the whole world, almost all industries have been trying to use it to get some very good applications like play chess, play computer game, or automated driving. But we have to admit that currently intelligence of AI is just like a baby. It's even not smarter than my 1- and 4-year-old daughters. And powerful computing capacity is required for algorithms. Millions of GPUs and ASIC chips running 24/7 make up the next generation of a computing network. Such capabilities could be transformed easily into AI application to deal with what we call the big data. And data is the key component. People outside China must be familiar with these icons, like Google, YouTube, Facebook, Amazon. They own a lot of data in the world. And theoretically, they are the biggest AI companies in the world. And by the way, as I know, these companies all cite their AI department here in Montreal because of the high-level human resources here. But there is something you are probably not familiar with, and it is a little bit related to our first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. It is called the Great Firewall, which divides the global internet into 2 parts: internet in China and the others. Compared to the other side of the world, we Chinese love internet so much. We shop online, we trade online, we order a car, we date a friend, we book a trip, we share an idea. Every day, we upload our daily thoughts, moods, stories, activities, behaviors, relationships, preferences. We contribute huge amount of our precious private data free to many of these companies, feeding many kinds of AI. China, with the largest population, could raise our baby AI up in a much faster way. Data is also the advantage of NukeTech. In the past 20 years, NukeTech has delivered 35,000 of inspection systems, and this machine has produced 170 billion X-ray images for inspection. And with the permission and the cooperation of our partners, we collected a huge number of real data from the scanners we installed, such as these narcotics. And using these precious real data and advanced algorithms, we combine security, inspection, and AI very deeply, and we are trying to empower many industries. And we also developed our AI hardware. It is used an external brain of all scanners. An external brain translated into Chinese is these 2 characters. It's called Why now? Because I don't have the time to teach you one by one, and so please everyone just follow me to read it, try to read it. Why now, please? Why now? Okay, very good. Dini, can you do it by yourself?
Why now?
No. Why now?
Why now?
Very good. Applause for Dini, please. So why now means external brain, another brain outside the body, but the direct translation is not that good. Especially in Chinese, it could be pictured very bloody. So actually, we are using another translation as its official name. We call it "we know." Because of the similar pronunciation with "why now," and it also tells people how confident we are. And this is our We Know AI inspection products. We have 4 boxes of different sizes corresponding to different inspection systems. And now we officially help people think outside the box and also inside. First is the basic product, we call it the We Know Classic. It is used for the X-ray inspection system and deal with the regular 2D image. And this is a video we recorded. Images are acquired from a dual view scanner, so you can see both top and side images of each bag. And after connecting with the We Know Classic box, all the suspects are marked out. As you can see, the We Know Classic accurately marked guns, knives, bottled liquids, and power banks automatically. So this is the We Know Classic. It's very smart, very powerful, and very compact, right? But to be honest, as one of the designers, I don't like it. It's always black. I want it green. I like green. It should be green. Green looks more natural, clean, alive, growing up. But my boss didn't agree with me. Come on, we should be serious. We are an inspection company, but not an entertainment. It's another long story. And the second box is called We Know HD, which is designed for ultra-high definition images generated by container and the vehicle inspection system. Same function, all the suspects in a huge container, like weapons, liquors, tobaccos, are marked out by We Know HD. And the third model is the We Know 3D, which is used together with our CT inspection system. And the CT technology comes from medical examination, well, now this technology is widely used in the security inspection industry. And connecting with We Know 3D, our CT can realize automated detection of what's hidden inside the bags. Currently, we can find dangerous threats like explosives, drugs, guns, knives, and high-value products such as electronics, alcohol, watches, cash, ivory, and some other suspects of some special purpose, just like cosmetics, medicine, cigarettes, books, perfumes, milk powder. And the last box is extra large and could be infinite. It is called We Know Cloud. Any device with an internet connection will need no more local boxes. The We Know Cloud can achieve intelligent detection far beyond imagination. Again, allow me to say that it would be nice if they are green. And based on our plan, with the increasing amount of real data input and the continuing training and updating of our algorithms, we believe we can achieve a very exciting result soon, inspection of everything. In addition, these smart boxes can achieve not only intelligent inspection, but also intelligent management, such as big data analysis, operational data, real-time monitoring, and remote system diagnosis, failure prevention, and predictive maintenance. So do you still remember at the beginning we are trying to make a best inspection system, but we have to be honest, probably our AI systems are not the best yet, but we have made some other good things. Our system is smart, accurate, fantastic, effective. It makes the product safe. And these are the major features of our window boxes. I will give you 10 seconds to read all these features. Okay, now it's time to finish my fantastic presentation. There are two kinds of deals there that are most profitable. One is helping people to kill spare time, and the other is saving people's valuable time. The old security inspection industry is none of them. Security inspection today is to provide you some safety and trust, but it takes away your loss of time. It's not a profitable deal, so that's why we are not rich yet. But today, we have window boxes. They give us a chance to redefine security inspection. We ensure the higher level of the security. On top of that, we also give back everyone your lost time. To be empowered by new tech products and services, our partners would enhance their capabilities. The passengers and the users would get pleasant experience. Every industry we are involved in would gain benefit. Technology would change life and make the world a safer place. Thank you. We have a video to tell you how we do that.
How does technology change your life? Some say Edison lit up the world through the darkness. Some say Bell made the voice go farther, people get closer. Some say Röntgen's discovery made people see more. Some say Wright brothers shortened the distance between hearts. Some also say Turing has changed the way we think. The story of the power has been written, and the bell is ringing again. Some use this power to predict. Some use this power to memorize and recognize. Some use this power to drive. We use this power to make you see more, or see much easier. We use this power to find threats. We use this power to find contraband. We use this power to extend possibilities. We use this power to improve experience. This is a collide of security technology and artificial intelligence. We are equipping with AI to explore the unknown, to extend the limitation, to enhance the perception and decision, the outburst of inspiration and epiphany, making science fiction world into reality. We want to bring the intelligence into all machines, to shuttle in different time, space, and culture, to listen to the magic story of every beings, to better understanding and exploring the mysteries of the future. Nuke Tech is always committed to stay innovative and insightful with you, to create a smarter and safer life.
Well, thank you very much, B, for a very entertaining presentation. Thank you again. Yes. So we will now break for lunch, the two food aisles outside. I would ask our panel members to stay behind just a few seconds for the official family portrait, and we'll see you back at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And will your suitcase follow you as you go out the room? Just in case someone wants to see it. Thank you so much. Good networking, good food. See you at 2.